Welcome to Radio Gaianym. This is Ginny Thwaite. I'm here with Cricket Claw and John. And today we're going to give you a sneak preview of something that's going to be on nemeter.org called Breaking Noose. So this will be current sky observation intel from John.
Yes, Breaking News is a section of Nemeter that will contain current intel on celestial happenings and things that I discover in the current moment. So right now, the subject of this special report is what we're going to call sky viewing anomalies. And we've had our share of these, three of us, over the past, couple years or more. For example, observing the moon.
Yeah, so I've spotted the moon rising, bouncing around the horizon where it rises, sometimes by 45 degrees, which is enormous. The sun setting in strange places, the planets setting in strange places.
And of course, we're not alone in this. I mean, you can go way back to the Gaianym, to 2011 and before, to find YouTube clips of people reporting, including the Inuit of Greenland, that the sun is just not appearing against the local horizon where it was traditionally.
So they were lost because obviously they're navigating complete whiteout. So they couldn't actually navigate or work out where they were because the sun moved.
And that's just one of many examples of people who were reporting these anomalies. So we're going to give you our special report on a very particular anomaly. We've been watching now for about 2 months, and I'm going to attempt to explain the significance of this anomaly, which just came to my mind yesterday afternoon when the thunder that introduces this talk was recorded. So another instance which relates to the current case is the Milky Way. What have we noticed about this?
It's disappearing.
It appears to be disappearing, appears to be dissolving. And one of the most prominent displays of the Milky Way, as you know, is a scorpion. And how do you remember, let's use the Mandela effect language, how do you remember having seen the scorpion in relation to the Milky Way?
It was embedded in the right-hand side of the the bottom parts of the Milky Way. It was embedded in that, and it was crawling out of the Milky Way.
I can remember going back to Santa Fe many, many years ago when I showed people the constellation from the llano above my house. And I say, oh, look, how vivid is the figure of the scorpion. It actually is the only constellation that resembles the animal. And look, it's as if the Milky Way is a river and the scorpion is like waist deep in the river, and the star Antares, which is my birth star,
the heart of the scorpion.
Heart of the scorpion happens to be right on the edge of the Milky Way. Well, now it appears quite different.
So that's been fading. The Milky Way has been evaporating in front of our eyes for about a year and a half.
I would concur with that. In Andalusia, it's the same. It's actually like a river that's drying up.
So because it's disappearing at that part of the Milky Way, you can now see the Archer, which is on the other side of the river, really, really clearly.
Yeah, all amateur skywatchers, whether they use telescopes or not, will tell you that the constellation of the Archer, which has a form of a teapot, is really difficult to observe because it's embedded in the densest part of the Milky Way, and there are globular clusters and there are nebulae all over the place. And now it's really easy to see the signature of the Archer, the teapot formation. So this came to our attention already down in Andalusia, like going on 2 years ago now. Mm-hmm. But it so happens that the current anomaly, which is the top of anything so far, does involve the scorpion. Because one of the observations that first brought our attention to this anomaly was observing the scorpion from a more northern latitude in Spain, noticing that it wasn't behaving the way that it behaved down in the south, close to Africa. I am so familiar, and so are you, with watching the scorpion kind of cartwheel across the sky. And when it descends in the west, it kind of goes down on its tail and then goes over. But here, what is it doing?
Well, I noticed a month ago, I suppose, that it was belly flopping.
Yeah. Instead of rotating down on its tail like the handle of a machine and dropping, it just flops down flat onto the horizon.
But it was flopping down again 45 degrees east of where it should have been
Yes.
going down.
This is the anomaly. It concerns the appearance of the places on the horizon where the constellations set and where the planets set. This is the anomaly
So this
we're
is
going to describe.
Yeah, so this is why you wrote that essay on metahistory that was sent out to your email subscription list about the azimuth.
Yes. And I'm linking that in the description so that it's available to everyone who listens to this talk. So there's a link to the metahistory page in the phenomorphic field. Okay? So just want to add a caveat before we begin. As a longtime sky observer and as two excellent and upcoming students, not novices by any means, we all hold ourselves to the same standard. We are very rigorous about examining whether we have a mistaken perception, there's something that we don't know about the way that the appearance of the sky changes at different latitudes. We know the sky doesn't look the same at the northern latitude of Europe as it does in the southern. And we are meticulous, I would say. I have taught you to be meticulous so that we do not suppose things to happen that are not in fact happening. So as far as I know, by our standards, this is an anomaly that is actually happening.
Rooted in reality.
Rooted in some kind of reality. Okay? So it started with an ideal observation, ideal situation of observation that was provided for us by the celestial display.
Because we could see 4 planets.
4 planets. Starting in July and in August, everyone could see, looking at toward the west after sunset, everyone could see, in fact, 4 planets. You could see not only the 3 outermost planets beyond the orbit of the Earth, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, but you could also see Venus, which is within the orbit of the Earth, if you accept the heliocentric model. It's just the model. Don't get hung up on it. Okay? So what we had was this spectacle. I have written down here the precise positions for August 1st. Looking west after sunset, there was the beautiful jewel of Venus, or the evening star. That was the lowest toward the horizon. And that was in 24 Virgo. It was in the Lion, the evening star. Then, shifting your gaze left and upward, came to Jupiter, 15 Scorpio, in the scales, in the pan of the scales. Further up and to the left, Saturn, 4 Capricorn, in the forehand of the Archer. And then way, way over, Mars standing at the head of the Goatfish in its retrograde, doing its retrograde loop. So you had this lineup. It was an alignment. And this alignment was exact to the extent that Venus, Jupiter, and Saturn were all exactly on the ecliptic. None of them was more than 1 degree from the line of the ecliptic. Now, this is the key to the observation of this anomaly. Is that all clear so far?
Are you going to talk about the other anomaly that we noticed a few months ago?
Concerning?
The triangle.
No, I'm not going to talk about that right at this moment. Okay. It's a different subject which raises another theme, and I still haven't worked through that yet. I have to find my illustrations. For the purposes of this explanation, there's one thing that everyone has to know. What is the ecliptic? Okay. It's the path of the sun through the sky. It's the apparent path of the sun, or you can switch around and you can say it's actually the orbital plate of the Earth. So out there in that evening sky that you look up at, If you're a novice or a newcomer, you may not be able to put anything together. There is an invisible line, a track that runs through the sky. That's called the ecliptic, and the sun is always on that track. So what we do is we observe the sky and we visualize the ecliptic. And we do that by observing the constellations that are along the ecliptic, because there are 13 constellations. You know, the Virgin, the Scales, the Scorpion, the Archer, and so forth. So as we were observing at the end of August, we saw this lineup. And we watched from here the exact point on the local horizon. I remember I stood on the porch and I said, oh, it's sunset now. Look over there. On the other side of that mountain, the sun is going down. Well, where the sun goes down is the exact place where this ecliptic line, which you must visualize as a large curving line, crosses the horizon. That's a simple rule. Where the sun is on the ecliptic, so wherever the sun goes down, the ecliptic crosses the horizon. And so that moment when the sun goes down has an azimuth setting. And the azimuth setting on August 1st was 303 degrees, which is from looking where we are, looking west, and then it's considerably to the north still. You know, it's considerably to the north of due west, that is to the right.
I think you better explain what the azimuth is.
The azimuth is explained in the article. The azimuth is just a marking, like on the scale of a protractor of 360 degrees. It's a marking on the protractor of your local horizon where a planet sets or rises. So it's at the marking 303 degrees, which is west, northwest, sort of like that, toward the northwest. So then I'm thinking, here's where it gets intriguing and baffling. And we'll talk about this all the time, right? Because we're just chatting about it. It's the evening, the sun goes down. Maybe we're sitting in the gallery waiting for Venus to come out. Oh, there's Jupiter. And I'm thinking, in an habitual way, based on the habits of observation that go on for now 50 years, I'm thinking, wow, what a great lineup. We see the sun goes down. We're going to see Venus go down right after the sun, and then Jupiter, and then Saturn. And I expect they're all going to go down at the same azimuth. They're all going to go down where the ecliptic line is located, because the ecliptic is a permanent feature of the cosmic structure. It doesn't shift back and forth across the horizon in a day. It shifts back and forth across the horizon in a year, but not in a day. So I have an expectation. You had it too. Oh, well, Venus is going to go down over by that mountain there, the same place that the sun went down, and then Jupiter will follow, and how convenient. We can watch them all on the track of the ecliptic. But that's not what happened, was it? No. At some point, I think it was in August, we noticed, to our total bafflement, that Venus was actually setting further south on the horizon.
But then
Yes.
the other planets started setting further south. It was like the planet settings were concertinas.
Or a concertina, like an accordion.
Yeah.
And it started to expand or contract, and suddenly their setting points on the horizon, instead of following where the sun set, they're setting at different points.
Yeah. One night when we were on this track, we observed Jupiter. It didn't even move.
Yeah.
The ecliptic, it just...
This was another
went
anomaly.
down.
About a couple of weeks into observing this, now you've got our attention, right? And so we're standing out there, sort of trying not to gape too much, on the porch, thinking, well, I'm going to watch Jupiter really closely to see where its set point on the horizon is, not where I expect it to be. And guess what? Jupiter doesn't move. It didn't move. It didn't set. It just stood there like it was frozen, like an animal that froze when you were watching it, when you had your attention on it. That was spooky. Okay? Anyway, what we gathered in our observations was that each of these planets had an azimuth that was decreasing. They were setting on the local horizon more to the southeast, which is left, and quite a ways from the point behind the mountain where the sun went down. And this, to me, is completely and utterly inexplicable. Right? Now, I wrote an astrological expert that I know, Guy Ottewell. I've been following his work for well over 40 years, and I relied on his astronomical almanac for key intel for the GNA. So I wrote him and I said, hey, what's up, And he said, oh, that's perfectly normal. Isn't that what he said?
Yeah.
Now, you mean to say that you're telling me, someone who's observed the sky for 50 years of his life, that this phenomena that he's observing the first time has always been happening that way? What can you say? It's like a Mandela effect, isn't it?
Yeah.
In other words, I don't remember that it used to happen that way. Now, Ginny, you've been down to Andalusia a lot, and you've spent many hours with me on the porch of the Turton's Towers.
With the tapestry of the night sky, just...
Like nowhere else in the world.
Yeah.
A view to the horizon of the mountains of Africa.
Which I presume is the same view you've got from your place.
I'm a bit further north.
A little bit,
Right.
but not much so.
But the sky is awesome. Yeah,
Yeah.
The sky's impeccable. You get the entire horizon. You get the entire western horizon. Not only that, but I've been to Rwanda many, many times, and I've observed Venus setting in Rwanda over the beautiful mountains of Rwanda. And so we have been observing the sky all these years. And have I ever said to you, oh, by the way, one thing you're going to notice as you observe the procession of setting stars and planets is that they will start to go down at a certain point on the horizon, way over there. But then as they continue to go down through the night, they will drop and shift to the south. Did I ever say that?
Never.
Never.
I never heard you say it.
And it's a fundamental fact of observation, apparently, to amateur astronomers. So, what's going on?
What's going on, John?
Yeah, what's going on, John? So what we're calling this is the anomalous azimuth shift. And what that translates into plain English is the inexplicable, to my mind, visual movement of a planet setting other than where I expect it to set. I expect any planet or star like Spica, like Spora Regulus, the heart of the lion. I expect that star to set at the same place on the horizon that the sun sets, because it's on the ecliptic. So this is the anomaly. Now, to proceed with part 2 of this explanation, we get to the juicy part. But before I do, I want to quote myself in something that I said in the course of the talks about flat Earth. Quote, "The great fact is just what nature does, not what the human mind expects her to do." And that includes even my mind, because I have a set of habitual expectations when I view the sky. You must have these expectations.
Yeah.
We now know when to expect Mars to rise. We now know that we can expect Mars to start moving directly from right to left, where it has been backing up from left to right. We have these expectations. But just like any other mindset, a mindset constructed of expectations can blind you to things. You will only see what you expect to see.
Yeah.
People only believe the information that they get, even if it contradicts their belief, doesn't matter, because the habit forces them only to believe what they already have accepted and to allow no exceptions. So I'm proposing that when you get into the anomalies and exceptions, you're getting into the actual living interactive perception of the cosmos. It's phenomorphic. The field you observe changes in interaction with the observer.
I'd just like to add here that when we're noticing these anomalies, we were running inside and checking on Stellarium to see if, and Stellarium was agreeing with it. It was agreeing with what we were observing.
It was showing the anomaly. It was not showing what I expected to see.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
And then there was
what does that mean?
Yeah, and then there was another anomaly 2 nights ago with Stellarium, which we'll talk about in the second part.
Okay, so now we come to the great word which I invite Ginny to pronounce.
Thanks. Paranatellon.
Paranatellon. I knew you were going to blow it. Now it's on record permanently. Paranatellon.
Paranatellon.
P-A-R-A.
You say it.
Paranatellon.
N-A-T-E-L-L-O-N. This word paranatellon is the cat's pajamas right now. Now, what is a paranatellon? Well, it's a very famous element of ancient astronomy and science. And it concerns the sequence of stars in the sky that rise or set simultaneously with a certain event. For instance, Venus is the evening star. Everyone, I think many people would be able to see that. They notice her even if they don't know that's Venus. And so you see this beautiful jewel of evening star hanging out there in the sky. And behind it you see certain starry constellations. And a section of those starry constellations descend with Venus. It's a selection out of the graphics of the sky. That's what the paranatellon is. In fact, there is a really famous case of the paranatellon, the most famous case in astronomy. No comparison. It's been the subject of enormous and lengthy studies, and it's called the heliacal rising of Sirius. Heliacal means rising before the sun, Helios. And it's known that the Egyptians based their calendar of, 1,480-year calendar cycle, and all of their agricultural activities and a large number of their sacred ritual activities upon the heliacal rising of Sirius. That is to say that from the flat horizon of the Nile, they would look east and they would see the bright star Sirius rising. And that's the brightest star in the sky, just before sunset. And the constellations that were behind Sirius at that time would represent a paranatellon to them. And they read that paranatellon as an important message, and they responded to that paranatellon by modeling their cultural and agricultural activities on that. So you get the idea that the paranatellon is a graphic signal in the sky that you learn to detect that gives a message it's a prompting to the human observers to enact and do something at that time. In fact, you just said if we break down the word, it seems to have 3 parts, right?
Yeah.
Para, which means for, nat, which is
Birth.
possibly related to birth, natal, and telon, which comes from the Greek word teleos, meaning aim or purpose. So paranatellon would seem to mean for the birth of a purpose, for the introduction of a purpose. So when ancient people observed these paranatellons, and there are many of them, they detected in it a message that had a moral initiative in it in some way. This is a powerful fact of ancient astronomical lore. Okay? So, if you want to read about the paranatellon in Hamlet's Mill, there is a description of a paranatellon there on page 256, I believe it is. So, what actually does the paranatellon have to do with the shift that we're noticing? Well, it's very simple. The occurrence of this anomaly is bringing our attention to the paranatellon of the planets. It's bringing our attention to that strand of the graphic sidereal pictures which is associated with the settings of these planets. Now, why is it doing that? Why is the anomaly, as it were, inviting us or provoking us to pay particular attention to the paranatellon? That's a big question.
Well, the reason that you came up with the paranatellon was because 2 days ago I was out after midnight and came scuttling in here saying, John, the scorpion is now setting way over in the west and setting how it used to set.
Yes.
So it stopped belly flopping and setting over to the southeast.
That's right.
And now it's, but actually I thought it was much further over than it should have been, where the sun sets.
It was. We have both been observing these unexpected cases of not only the planets, but the constellations associated with them. They're located in constellations, setting at places that we did not expect them to set. We expect them to set in the area to the right of the horizon where the sun was setting. They're setting so far off from there that you just have to stop and gape at them and figure, first of all, how can this be? And second of all, if this happens routinely, how come this is the first time I've ever observed it? So that's our mindset. That's where we stood. So I'd like to point out that actually, a good number of years ago, I can't say how many it was, I discovered something about the paranatellon. That's the plural form. And it was one of those insights or discoveries that comes up in the course of observing the sky and studying mythology simultaneously. In fact, I think it came up possibly when I was studying the constellations as they would appear in Greece in ancient times, or the constellations as they appeared far in the north, in Norway and Finland. And as I was studying the mythology, say, of Finland over the Kalevala, and I was looking at the constellations that would set in Norway at a certain time of the year, I saw that that section of the sky had in it the constellations that corresponded to the Finnish myth of the Kalevala. And I thought, well, that's really interesting. It means that at the latitude of Finland, they would have observed a selection of the sky, a section of the sky, locally, that reflected to them themes and images and heroes in the Kalevala. And that's how it first came to my attention. So I formed the idea that the paranatellon is a selection of the sky pictures viewed in a certain locale that delivers intel to that locale. It reads intel into the observers at that locale, that is to say, into the indigenous people who live there. So, for instance, if you observe right now Jupiter in the scales, it's part of a paranatellon that involves the constellation of the scales, the constellation of the scorpion, who is jarring the crossbeam of the scales, and the constellation of the Archer, plus constellations above and below those, because the paranatellon is composed not only of constellations on the ecliptic, but also of extra-ecliptic constellations. So you would have the scales, you would have Bootes, the warrior constellation.
For you kids.
Yeah, it's a picture, a composite of maybe 6 or 8 constellations, tells a story, but it's only an episodic story. It's an episode episode taken out of the massive visual display of the sky
The
environment.
tapestry of the sky.
Specific to that locale.
Yes, specific to that locale. So right now, if someone is in Norway and they observe the paranatellon of Jupiter in the scales setting, followed by the scorpion, followed by the archer, they're going to see it at a different angle than it's seen in Mexico. They're going to see it also at a different velocity because the velocity of the setting changes. And so that means that the paranatella of Jupiter setting right now in Mexico carries a different display selection from the paranatella of Norway. Well, what does that mean? You know, how could you derive what is the significance of that? So that's what came to me yesterday as we were sitting. I asked that question. We were asking that question together. And as we were sitting upstairs yesterday, around 5 o'clock, you saw the look on my face because you know that look. It's familiar. And suddenly I realized the significance of this. And I have to say, again, as a caveat, because what I'm going to say now is momentous, and it's a huge claim. And it could be taken as delusional and mythophrenic and grandiose. I know that. But what I'm going to say is, I consider that what I'm going to explain now is valid, whether or not this is an actual anomaly. Maybe it's just a result of my mistake. Maybe I've been...
And my mistake.
And your mistake. And maybe we've been observing this guy and we've just been too dumb to notice this before. But whether or not it is an actual anomaly doesn't matter, because it has the effect of getting our attention and bringing our attention to a most momentous fact.
It's the ping.
It's the ping. It's the ping. And so the fact is that the Planetary Animal Mother herself is using the display of the constellations to show that she is selecting the folklore and the folk memories that belong to every people of every nation of the world. The Mexicans, the Norwegians, the Iranians, the Japanese, the Chileans, the Polynesians, they all have their unique paranatella that they observe. She is selecting these paranatella out and charging them with the folk memory to bring it to the attention of these people. And we noticed it so that I can say what I just told you. It was brought to my notice and to our notice so that I could then turn around and announce to the world that this is in fact what is happening. And when I explained it, I used this analogy of a tapestry, right?
Yeah.
Probably to wind up this talk, it would be good to repeat that tapestry, that analogy. So see if I can get it right. If you're standing in a huge room, like in some of the palaces and chateaus of Europe, there are sometimes huge tapestries on the wall, like the Bayeux tapestry, and they commemorate events like battles and so forth. If you step back and step away, you see the entire picture as a whole. That is like seeing the Sophianic narrative. That's the entire picture. That's the complete tapestry. The 9-episode Sophianic narrative, the fallen goddess scenario. But if you go forward and you approach the tapestry and bring yourself up to it very closely, which is comparable to the local, being in a local setting, you'll see fine threads. You'll see that the figure of a horseman or the figure of a woman standing in the window of a chateau is composed of a braid of fine threads. So you can see the individual braids of the tapestry when you're up close. And when you step back, you see the whole picture. Well, the paranatella are the individual braids of the tapestry. And she is unwinding and rewinding those braids. And that means that she is making accessible to the folk memory of all people the particular story of their origin and of their people and their race romantic identity that they can revive because they remember it and they can relive it now. Was that a sneeze?
I suppressed it.
A sneeze is always a sign of approval. So she's distributing the local variant of that folk memory, which applies to the people in all of these settings. Now, those of us who are in planetary tantra know how to look at the sky, can know she is doing this. Imagine being able to describe this.
It's their living myth, isn't it?
It's their living myth and the memory of their folk identity that is the braid, their braid. Everyone has a braid in the great weave of her narrative. And she is rebraiding it and offering it now into the imagination and into the endopsyche of peoples all around the world. And what is the evidence of that? Well, today, September 9th, is the day of elections in Sweden. And how many people do we know right now? We know, we've met a good number of them in our Nordic band who are doing exactly this. They are reviving the lore of Iceland, the Icelandic Eddas. They are reviving the national epic of Finland, the Kalevala. They are exploring the Bach saga and seeing how that relates to the Sophianic narrative. They are listening to Jackson Crawford read in Old Norse. And there are political groups and cultural groups who, as I speak, are actively recapturing their identity because she is prompting them to remember. She is prompting their memory. And we can read that by this anomaly. We can read that in this anomaly. Chemnitz in Germany, where there was a huge flare-up at the moment when Mars was stationary, turning direct, exact moment, which may indicate the trigger event for the reclaiming of all of Europe from foreign invasion and from the Xenos. So this is a tremendous turning point. And it's a real thrill. I mean, it's an incredible thrill to. I still haven't got over it because it's just really unbelievable, you know. But you don't have to believe it for it to be happening.
Well, you don't even have to know what you're looking at for it not to be working on you either, do you?
Exactly.
I mean, helpful if you do know.
Exactly.
Aren't we lucky?
Yep.
Yeah, we kind of like reading her psychic weather, you know, and it's easy for us to sit here. Easy. Yeah. Tell you how easy it is, folks. It's easy for us to.
But the whole time we were talking about this, I saw you had that look.
Yeah.
Oh, he's got something.
You're like a child in a
Yeah,
sweet shop.
and then you were explaining it to us, and a thunderstorm.
Yeah, the finale is within 5 minutes. I say, wait, I got it. I know what she's trying to get our attention so that we see something that she's doing. And she relies on her intimate witnesses in Planetary Tantra to get her signal and then turn around and convey it to the world. And now I know what she's trying to tell us. She's offering the braid of every indigenous folk memory to reawaken the sovereignty of the people.
And as you said that, cue thunder.
And it said that thunder comes in. It hasn't been thunder all day, right?
Yeah.
It's been warm, not particularly gray or cloudy. Key thunder from the western horizon.
And lightning.
Yeah.
I didn't see any lightning, but I heard the thunder. So I lingered with you a few minutes, and then I went out on the porch where we've been observing this analogy, and I watched what the thunder did. Now that's a piece of that thunder recorded at the beginning of this talk. What that thunder did for 45 minutes as I'm standing on the porch is it broke in the area of the west over the mountain where I observed the sun go down, where I first began to expect that the planets would follow, and they didn't. So the thunder was coming from the place where I had the first observation. And then, in the course of 45 minutes, it moved south.
It scalloped.
It scalloped along the horizon
Yeah.
and moved south exactly in the way that this azimuth shift moved south until it reached the southwest, almost the true south, and then that's where it dissolved after almost an hour.
Yeah. It's 180 degrees, isn't it? Basically.
Well, it was not about 90 degrees from the west,
In the west, okay.
northwest to the south, a little more than 90 degrees.
Right, it felt like it was going, sort of, it was circumnavigating.
It felt like it was coming all the way around the other side at a certain point, like 180. I know. So there again, you have, well, what you're going to call it, interactivity with the world event. So in conclusion, I'm going to refer back to the Mandela effect and reiterate my claim that in October of last year, the Mandela effect as such, as a memory anomaly, faded out and it started to operate in a different phase. And I would identify this as an advanced phase of the correction effect, because not only it's signaling to what she's doing in her correction, she's informing us of what she's doing in her correction through the correction effect. And the correction effect gets your attention through anomalies. So Goddess bless anomalies. And we'll leave it at there for now.